has just been, that silly white cat and just other stuff. But I figured that, how about I talk about something that I have an interest in? Yes, Rex has interests. Can you believe it? Um, but this is something that I was, well, no, I wouldn't say was. I mean, I still have a fond interest in, and that is none other than weather, or meteorology, meteorology. Yes, I was fascinated with the weather when I was a kid, and even as an adult, I still am. But it's not something that I mean. I would have loved to have pursued a degree in this, but with how times are now, I mean, it's not really something that's really worth going for now. But even without all that, it's still something that I am very interested in, and just like seeing other people, report on or observe. So we're gonna just be talking about that. I mean, I have some knowledge on it, so we'll be talking about that. And I mean, where do we start off with? I mean, I guess obviously it starts off somewhere, and that's with precipitation. Yes. Which, I mean, I guess it's just really a fancy word for saying, like, literally anything that falls from the sky. And that includes, rain, snow, sleet, hail, all of that. And, but, most of the time, if, when you're asking or telling people what precipitation is, I'm pretty sure I don't guarantee or think about that, it's rain. And, that's fine. It's correct. Because, rain starts way before it ever hits the ground. Because, it actually starts with water vapor. I mean, you can't see it, but it's always there, just floating in the air. And water vapor comes from oceans, lakes, rivers, and even from the ground after it rains. Heat from the sun warms the surface, and that water evaporates. It turns into vapor and rises up into the atmosphere. Now, as that air rises, it cools down, and when it cools, the vapor starts to condense into these tiny little droplets that are like little particles that look like dust or salt, I guess. And that's how clouds are made. Yes, clouds. Those white, fluffy little things up in the air. And they're just basically like, billions of those tiny droplets that are just suspended in the air. And obviously there are different types of clouds, and you can tell by like the shape of it and their appearance. Like, for example, there's this one called cumulus clouds. Cumulus clouds. And those are those are like the puffy ones. They look like cotton. And, usually for the most part, they mean, average or just fair weather. There's like nothing crazy happening. They're just there. And then you have these, and you have these that are called the stratus clouds, and those are more like, I guess, like they look like a blanket. Those look like a blanket, and they're like flat, and they're just kind of covering the sky. And usually they tend to be like, gray, and they bring like steady light rain or just the drizzle. So it's just, it's kind of just a quiet kind of weather. Nothing too crazy, but it's just there. And then you've got the cumulonimbus clouds. Cumulonimbus. And those are like the big scary ones. The ones that you see during thunderstorms. They're tall, they're very towering, and just pretty intimidating if you just really look at them. Those are the ones that bring heavy rain, thunder, lightning, and even sometimes hail or tornadoes if conditions are right. It's something that you don't want to mess with. But those are cumulonimbus clouds. But anyway, so back to the rain. So inside a cloud, those tiny droplets are constantly bumping into each other, merging, growing bigger and heavier, and eventually, they get too heavy for the air to hold them up, and that's when they fall. That's rain. Now, it's pretty simple, right? But there's more going on underneath it. And you may be asking, what's going on? Well, what determines whether it actually rains or not often comes down to these pressure systems. So, air pressure. It's basically the weight of the air above you. You don't feel it, but it's always there. And a low pressure system means that the air is rising. When air rises, it cools. And when it cools, clouds form. And when clouds form, you get precipitation. So, low pressure usually means cloudy, rainy, and sometimes stormy weather. And on the other hand, a high pressure system means that the air is sinking, and sinking air warms up, and warm air doesn't like to form clouds, so the sky clears out. That's why high pressure systems are usually associated with clear skies and just calm, beautiful weather, just a day where you want to actually be outside. So, think of it as like, low pressure builds things up and then high pressure settles them down. And then you also have these fronts, which fronts are like, where two different air masses meet, and when they meet, things happen. Like a warm front is when warm air moves into an area with cooler air. The warm air rises slowly over the cool air, forming layered clouds, and like from earlier stratus clouds, and that leads to steady, prolonged rain. It's just, it's not really anything too dramatic. It's just, I guess you could say, persistent. Where it just rains that just, sticks around for like, I'd say a couple hours. But, it's not like a cold front, on the other hand. A cold front is when cold air pushes into the warm air, and the cold air is denser, so it shoves the warm air upward quickly. That rapid rise creates those big cumulonimbus clouds that I mentioned earlier. So instead of the gentle rain, you get the sudden intense storms, the heavy rain, thunder, lightning, and just all of that. And it can happen pretty quickly too, especially if you're like living somewhere in the South. For example, the South in the United States, especially these summertime thunderstorms, like it just happens very sudden. But anyway, yeah. And then you also have this other front called occluded fronts, and I feel like those don't get really mentioned that often, but I'll just mention it just to throw it in there. But that's when a cold front catches up to a warm front and lifts the warm air completely off the ground. So the weather gets pretty complex there. It's like mixed precipitation and all that. So you don't really know exactly how to predict it easier, unlike, a cold or a warm front, but it's always moving and it's always changing. And even the type of precipitation can change depending on the temperature. So, like if the air is cold enough all the way from the cloud to the ground, you get snow. And then you have ice crystals that start forming instead of those water droplets. And if snow starts falling but passes through a warmer layer of air, it might melt into rain and then refreeze before hitting the ground. That's sleet. And if it freezes on contact with surfaces, that's freezing rain. And that one is actually pretty dangerous. So it may look harmless, but it coats everything in ice, and you don't want to be driving or walking around when you have ice covering the surfaces, because that can get really, really dangerous. And especially if it's on power lines and just on trees, it can be really bad. So, moving past that, there's hail, which forms in strong storm clouds, which actually reminds me that there's this called updrafts, which is basically just rising air that carry those droplets up into freezing parts of the cloud. They freeze, fall, get pushed up again, collect more layers, and then over and over until they're too heavy. And then they fall as chunks of ice. It's really crazy when you think about it, but that's what's all part of it as a cycle. The water evaporates, it forms clouds, and then it falls to precipitation, returns to the ground, and then eventually evaporates again. It never really stops. And even right now, wherever you are, there's moisture in the air around you. You may not really feel or notice it at all, but it's there. It's just moving around, shifting with the temperature and the pressure. I guess, that's part of the reason why I like the weather so much, and why I just find it pretty fascinating. It's constant, but it's never the same. And you can understand the rules and know everything about it, but the exact outcome is always different and unpredictable. And I guess that's just what brings fascination into it. I mean, I've had times where, in my years of living, again, it snowed here last year. We've had nearly a foot of snow in the southern U.S. I'm not gonna give my exact location, but it usually almost never happens, and that was insane. It actually snowed here. I got to witness it, and it stuck around for I'd say, I think it was 4 days before 4 to 5 days before it all melted away. And I've lived through several hurricanes and just a lot of interesting weather events in the last 21 years. I don't know how, but it's interesting. It's really interesting. But that's just from my experience. I don't know how it is for you, but let me know in the comments, I guess. But anyway, moving past that now. What else can I talk about here? I guess, speaking on all that, we can talk about humidity. Let's talk about humidity. So humidity is basically how much water vapor is in the air. Just it's simple as that. But the way it feels, that's where it gets interesting. You might have probably heard of relative humidity, and if you have, that is the percentage that you usually see in those weather reports. It's not just how much moisture is in the air, It's how much the air is holding compared to how much it can hold at that temperature. Because warm air can hold more moisture than cold air. So if the air is warm and full of moisture, the relative humidity goes up. And when it gets close to 100%, that's when the air is basically saturated. That's when things start to happen like fog, dew, or clouds forming right around you. That heavy, sticky feeling that you feel on some of those days, like when you're out there standing on the bus stop at school, or just being at school early in the morning. That's high humidity. The air is already full, so sweat doesn't evaporate as easily. It kind of stays. But when humidity is low, the air feels dry, sweat evaporates faster, and things feel cooler even if the temperature is the same. There's also something called the dew point, and that is the temperature at which the air becomes saturated and water vapor starts to condense. And honestly, dew point tells you more about how it feels than temperature sometimes, because if the dew point is high, the air feels heavy, and if it's low, it feels crisp. It's really subtle, but once you notice it, you don't really stop noticing it. Now, all of that moisture, all of that air, it doesn't just sit still. That's where jet streams come in. Now, what are jet streams, you may ask? Jet streams are these fast-moving ribbons of air high up in the atmosphere, like really high. They're found in the upper parts of the troposphere. They can move at speeds of over 100 miles per hour sometimes, just constantly flying around our planet. You can't see them directly, but they shape everything. They form because of temperature differences, mainly between cold polar air and warmer air closer to the equator. Where those differences are strongest, the air starts moving quickly, and that movement turns into these narrow bands. The two main ones are the polar jet stream and the subtropical jet stream. The polar jet is the one that usually affects us more. It dips and rises in these big waves. When it dips south, it drags cold air down with it. When it rises north, it lets warm air move up. So when you hear about sudden cold snaps or unusual warmth, the jet stream is usually involved somehow. And it also helps guide storms. Storm systems tend to follow along the jet stream like they're being carried by it. So, if the jet stream is active and wavy, weather becomes more dynamic, more movement, more change. And if it's relatively straight and calm, things stay more stable. It's kind of like a highway in the sky. Anyway, I've been yapping. I gotta stop. Maybe if you want a part 2 or something, just let me know. But I just wanted to get the basic fundamentals and just of all this stuff. But that just goes to show that, I am a weather nerd, I guess. So I just have fascination in this kind of stuff. But this is how much I'll just say for now. I know that this is a lot, but you don't have to remember everything. Just next time when you're outside, maybe just look at the sky again and just, pay attention to the clouds and just the way that the air feels. Whether it's still or just moving, warm or cool, dry or heavy. Just remember that Mother Nature is just, unique like that, and that's what makes our planet just really, really interesting. But yeah, that's as far as I guess I'll just talk about it for now. And I hope you found it interesting. And I hope you see why that, I just like it so much. Thanks for listening, and I could go on forever with it, but I'll just leave it be for now. Alright. I'll see you guys in the next one. And the next video, and the next video, and the next video, and the next video, and the next video. Bye bye. Bye bye.